Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and we'll do another one here based on your suggestions. This one is actually a past suggestion. The very first time I asked for suggestions for my new Aliens and UFOs series, this was one of them. So again, I promised I was going to revisit some of my past ones, and here it is here. This one I picked because it has to do with a phenomenon that mainly affects Brazil, but interestingly enough, if its stories are true, it also happens here in America, specifically the infamous Skinwalker Ranch, which I've talked about in one of my past videos. I'm going to include that link too if you haven't seen it, the one on the Skinwalker Ranch. It seems to have some of my best views, so I'll include it below. But this one, again, is primarily in Brazil, and it has to do with the phenomenon known as the Chupa UFO phenomenon, or in other places it's called the Chupa-Chupa UFO phenomenon. And so I'll talk about all that information here, some pretty fascinating, some pretty interesting info, so I'll be glad to share it with you here. So what is this Chupa-Chupa phenomenon? Well, again, it has to do with a set of UFO encounters, perhaps some of the most frightening ones yet. I mean, when I was reading this information, it definitely pushes the dial past 10 when it comes to how intense and how frightening they can be. And they occur there in Brazil, apparently starting sometime in the 1970s, the late 1970s to be exact, and can continue to this very day. There's not so many reports today as back then, but there still seems to be every now and then just something happening with this very same type of encounter. And it has to do with the way that they are encountered. Again, very, very frightening stuff. So this all started, there was a region there in Brazil, it's called the Para region, and sometime between the months of October, November, and December of 1977, and then especially the first half of 1978, that's when this very similar set of circumstances were occurring. Witnesses, those that were unlucky enough to come across these set of UFOs, describe them seeing something instead of, let's say, the traditional UFO, which is either like a ball of light or maybe even a saucer-shaped type object. No, in this case, it's squared. That's what makes it so distinct. I've never heard of anything as far as like a square UFO, but here we are talking about it. That's how they described it. It was a small squared UFO, and traditionally it flies very low to the ground, about 30 feet off the ground. In fact, again, quite different from traditional UFO encounters. Those that you've heard in the past, they always seem to have UFOs way high up in the sky, or in some cases when they're found, let's say by someone, then they just immediately shoot very far away. Now in this case, these things purposely stay low to the ground, because here's where the frightening part comes. By the way, another distinction of these UFOs is, and quite different again from past encounters, instead of them being just completely silent like everyone else seems to report with other UFOs, no, in these cases, these square object type UFOs emit a hum, something in terms of like if you had an older air conditioner on, or if you had a refrigerator on, and let's say there's just complete silence in the room, and you know how that refrigerator makes that distinct hum. Well, that's how it's been described here. So, not silent at all. In this case, though, you could definitely hear it coming. But again, it stays 30 feet off the ground for one purpose only. Apparently, these UFOs like to hunt for locals around the area there in Brazil. So, take that into consideration. Instead of, let's say, yourself having to accidentally find these UFOs, no, in this case, these UFOs distinctly go after you. And the reason why it's called the Chupa-Chupa, or as others in a translated, I guess, type of description call it, the vampire lights, it's because whenever these things find a local, they're supposed to emit a strange beam of light, very thin but very strong, and it purposely hunts the locals. So imagine this thing 30 feet off the ground emitting that light. You're running for your dear life, and that light is following you. So you can totally imagine how how scared somebody like that would be, especially in the dead of night, to see something like this chasing after you. And then what happens next is once that light hits that person, then it's supposed to do something. Who knows what it does necessarily, like the purpose for it, but physically it's supposed to create some little pinpoint stabs within the person's body. So it's supposed to be either just one small pinpoint stab, or it's supposed to be multiple of them, almost in like a repeating pattern of sorts. But there's also a loss of blood, because within those small pinpricks there's supposed to be let's say the remnants of blood almost either coming out or continuing to come out. But there's definitely the idea, kind of like how when you get cut, how maybe blood will flow at the beginning but then it'll stop, but you can still tell that there was blood there. Very same thing happens in this case when that small beam of light, that strong beam of light, hits the person. Another physical side effect is, and this is both for both men and women, people report that they complain of their body being numb, that they have severe headaches after the encounter, and then also there's a sense of, I guess, disorientation because of what occurred to them. No real news though, as far as like the people stating that they've been abducted, that there's been a loss of time, that they've been out of the planet completely. No, in this case, this beam of light just basically hits them, does its thing, whatever it's supposed to do, that leads to those physical, I guess you call them attacks on the person's body, and then the UFO just goes away, and it's it at that point. The reason why these UFOs hunt in that particular area there in Brazil is because there it's supposed to be, like, I guess is in most of Brazil, depending on certain locations, it's supposed to be a very poor location. So the people, in order to get their food, actually hunt out at night. And when they do so, they do so like on the top of the trees, and in of itself, they accidentally make themselves, and a bit of irony, as they're hunting for prey, they make themselves easy prey for these UFOs standing near on top of the trees. So the UFOs essentially find them pretty quickly and then do their thing with that very strong beam of light. By the way, there have been tales of UFO of these people, some of them actually taking on the UFOs with their weapons. Like if they have rifles, they try shooting at them. But there was a captain there, someone by the name of Captain Urange Holanda. He told a Brazilian UFO magazine, yes, there actually is a Brazilian UFO magazine, if you can believe it. He told them and has warned people, don't shoot at them, do not shoot, because the way it has happened was there was a carpenter that did so. He was an older man, about 50, 60 years old, and no sooner did he shoot at the UFO than this light, of course, hit him. Either he attracted attention from the shooting, or it was already too late and this thing was coming straight towards him. But either way, the light hit him and it made his body numb, and then he fell to the ground and he was almost paralyzed, not just from that physical fall, but also because of the after effects of the light. And in this case, it would seem to be very severe. Like this UFO and the beings within them were not too happy with being shot at, because it took him no less than 15 days until he could finally move. The way that the captain described it was the carpenter could see, hear, and speak, but they could not move at all. Whatever that light did made him physically paralyzed without actually being paralyzed, if it makes sense. But so much so that these attacks happened that the government there in Brazil actually set up an operation. It was called Operation Saucer, so pretty cut and dry when it came to the name. But the whole idea was they sent out a group of soldiers there within that area to try to get interviews, to try to go and find some of these victims, examine their injuries, try to see if also they could find a chupa themselves. And apparently they did so. In some cases, some of the soldiers did indeed see these square-like objects, flying around within that area. So much so that there was no less than 2,000 pages, a report, 2,000 pages actually created with some 500 or so photographs, and this has been placed within or disseminated within various UFO groups. So I'm sure there's a lot of that information out there if you wanted to truly take a good detailed look at it. But as far as how this ties in again to America is apparently this square-like thing, these square-like objects also seem to permeate within the Skinwalker Ranch. Now, when I was covering that information, I don't recall anything about that, but it seems like there are several reports too with regards to that, of these UFOs visiting that Nevada location. There's even a book called The Hunt for Skinwalker, and in it there's a chapter focusing on it that's called, the chapter is called Chupas, and so that seems to be a phenomenon that's also encountered there within the Skinwalker Ranch, not just within Brazil, but again seems to be mainly within the Brazil area. So, but that's it. That's all the information that I have, at least for this video, with regards to the Chupa-Chupa phenomenon. If anyone has any more info they'd like to share, a very, very frightening set of encounters, by far, I guess, some of the most intense ones I can think of. Some of the past videos I've talked about, obviously people had their own encounters, but never in the sense that they were being hunted like this. But so if anyone has any more info tied to that, maybe more recent attacks, maybe around Brazil or anywhere else, that would be really, really good to hear too. So, alright everybody, thanks again as always, take care.